We have a very special guest today. This is the radio play-by-play announcer for the Portland Trailblazers. He's been in broadcasting for the last 26 seasons and also the last 15 with the Portland Trailblazers. And also in 2007, he was named the Oregon Broadcaster of the Year. So everyone give a welcome applause to Brian Wheeler. So Brian, this is just going to be very informal, just questions, and we'll get some questions from the audience real quick. But maybe I'll start out with, how did you get into broadcasting? Was there that one role model you had growing up as a kid that you always looked afterwards? And just tell us a little bit about that.
I was pretty lucky that early on in life, I love sports. I knew that, and I was fairly astute at a young age, like 11 or 12, and figuring out that even though I could play any sport I wanted to, I could compete favorably in any sport I wanted to. I could see I wasn't going to excel in any one of them enough to really play any one sport seriously as I got older. So I thought, so what's the best way to stay connected if I can't play long term? And I think it was my mother who said, you like to talk a lot, maybe you can do something with that. And I said, yes, all right, I'll be an announcer. So I'd tell my friends, we'd go out and play touch football in the street, play pickup basketball in the gym. I'd say, I want to be an announcer. And they'd say, well, announce the games while we're playing. And so I had all this practice doing it then. I was an only child growing up, so to amuse myself, I'd have a Nerf ball and a Nerf hoop in my bedroom, and when the ball was in my left hand, Jones had it. When it was in my right hand, Smith had it, and I'd do these make-believe basketball games, and I'd have the door closed, and my mother would come walking by, and she'd hear something, she'd bang on the door and say, quit talking to yourself. And I said, no, I'm doing a game. And so I had a lot of practice before I ever had the chance to think about broadcasting in a serious vein. And so I got to college at Loyola Chicago, and everybody, I think, you guys know either through your own personal experience or know friends that start college and aren't quite sure what they want to do long term, and they put down their majors undecided. I mean, from day one, I put down communications, broadcasting is what I wanted to do, and so I got a chance to work at the student radio station at Loyola, and Loyola was a school, small private school, no football, no baseball, no hockey, so basketball was really the primary sport. And I thought that I'd have to maybe wait a few years to get involved with the student radio station, but in the second semester of my freshman year, there was an ad in the student paper for announcers needed for the radio station. So I called up, and it's the middle of the basketball season, so I didn't figure they had any sports positions available, but the program director asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, I'd love to do sports, but you probably have all your announcers. And he said, well, not really. Could you do a women's game tonight? And so I said, yeah, sure, I could do one. And so I did the women's game that night. For the men's team, they had a color broadcaster, color analyst that was very involved in his fraternity, and he really was kind of torn between the two positions and wanted to devote more time to his fraternity. So when he heard that I was interested in doing some work, he said, well, I'll bow out, and you can finish the season doing the color analyst work for the men's team. So I did that. And when the season ended, the play-by-play guy was graduating, so I knew that's really what I wanted to do. And I made some suggestions to the program director about, some things I thought could be done better and improved with the sports coverage. And he said, we never really had a sports director. Maybe you could take on that position. So I said, sure. And as the sports director, of course, you got to make the decision about, who had the assignments for the various sports duties. And men's basketball was, the primary assignment. And I surveyed all the available candidates and determined that I was the most qualified to have the position. So called my own number on that one and stepped into that assignment and finished out my college career doing play-by-play for men's basketball, which only reinforced that's what I wanted to do. And so and was able to graduate, continue to do the Loyola games on commercial radio even after I graduated, but all the while wanted to get an NBA job if I could, and applied for some, came in second a couple of times right away, and then had an opportunity to take a job in Seattle, working for the radio station that was carrying the Sonics games at the time. And it was going to not be play-by-play, but it was going to be as the pre-half and post-game host for the Sonics broadcast. And so at least I would have a day-to-day affiliation with an NBA team. And all the people that I'd gotten to know in the NBA advised me that that was a good strategy to not continue to do the college play-by-play, but get with an NBA team. And so that, I think, was a good move. Stayed there for a couple of years, applied for another NBA job in Toronto when they came into the league, and I thought I actually was going to get it. I had an interview. The people that were put in charge of making the decision handed me a book on places to live in Toronto and said, go home for a week. We're going to talk to the Board of Governors and work this out, but we feel really good about things. And unfortunately, they told me after talking to the Board of Governors that one of the important folks on the board said, how come if we're hiring a Canadian-born announcer on television, why are we thinking about an American on radio? And it was very controversial when Toronto and Vancouver came into the league about the Canadian folks feeling that the Americans were going to rush in and take all the jobs and so forth. So it was a sensitive issue. So for no other reason than where I was born, I lost out on that job, basically. So stayed in Seattle, and then after a couple of years, opportunity came up in Sacramento, and moved there. And the only reason I took that was I was doing the same work that I was doing in Seattle, but I could be a backup play-by-play announcer because the main guy would miss some games, and I could finally get some NBA games under my belt, put a demo tape together that had NBA games on it. And then I was there for 3 years, and then that led to the Blazer opportunity in 1998. And some thought it might not last 15 months, but now it's lasted 15 years. So now they can't get rid of me. So here I am.
And now we talked about this a little bit before, but I'm sure the audience wants to know, how do you come up with your signature phrase, "Boom Shakalaka"?
Yeah, there's a few along the way. People ask me about coming up with things, and it's kind of like similar to, if you hear Bill Schonely talk about Rip City, it wasn't something that he deliberately said going into a game, I'm just going to try this tonight and see what happens. It was a game in which one of the Blazer players, Jim Barnett, who's now an announcer for the Warriors, just took a shot and it swished through the net, and he just thought it was rippling through the net, so he just said Rip City. And at the end of the game, somebody that was on press row heard him say it and said, that was really good, you ought to try that again. And for 28 years doing the games, he kept saying it and became his signature phrase. And so really the Boom Shakalaka was something. I loved the movie Stripes, and if you remember the movie, at the tail end, Bill Murray and his troupe had to prepare for their final exam, but they didn't have a sergeant anymore to do so they had to do it on their own. So, in the Marines, you have your leader say something, and everybody else in the group repeats what they said. And so during the course of their final exam, as they're going through those paces, at one point, Bill said, boom shakalaka, boom shakalaka. And so I always thought it was kind of a funny term, and I said, is there some way to maybe incorporate it into a broadcast? And so to me, it seemed like something you would say if there was a really emphatic slam dunk. And I wasn't a video game player as a kid, really. I played Pac-Man, Miss Pac-Man, which probably really dates me, but I wasn't aware that NBA Jam, there was a game that came out that the announcer on the game said boom shakalaka when there was an emphatic slam dunk. But it was a sheer coincidence. That wasn't why I used it, but people were convinced that knew the game that was where I borrowed it from. But the other ones, I think, have been a little more natural terms. Sometimes when there's even a more emphatic dunk, I say, ooh, that was nasty, and I drag out the ooh and the nasty. And the alliterations are something I came up with. If the other team's coach has to call a timeout, we call it kind of a hot timeout, where the Blazers are going through a great stretch and it forces the other team to call a timeout. I try to come up with 3 words that start with the same letter and basically indicate frustration, anger, something to that effect. So you get ashamed, appalled, astounded, bewildered, befuddled, bemused, confused, concerned, confounded, dejected, deflated, devastated, jilted, jaded, jolted, mystified, mesmerized, mortified, staggered, stunned, stupefied. So you get all, things like that. So that's something that was more original that I don't think I've heard anybody else do. So if you can come up with a few, I think usually though when you intentionally try to say I'm going to come up with one, usually your mind goes blank and you don't. But if it happens by accident and it sounds like something that's fun and you try it again, usually that's how many guys and girls catch phrases over the years. That's kind of usually how they're born, simply by not trying to come up with one, if that makes any sense.
And you mentioned Bill Schonely, and he was the legend radio announcer before you. How much did you learn from him, and how hard was it to just switching broadcasters for the city of Portland, and how did they respond to you taking over, and just how hard was that adjustment overall? Yeah,
looking for NBA jobs, as I was, full-time play-by-play jobs, I was trying to stay in tune with the opportunities that might or might not come up. And after getting to Sacramento, I knew that the Portland job was going to come open. But as I observed, reading online Oregonian stories about what was happening here, it became apparent that the Blazers were moving Bill out of the lead play-by-play position sooner than he wanted to be moved out. And in fact, Bill's friends had told him, if you go on the air and you let everybody know that this is not your idea, the fans will revolt, the sponsors will rise up, and the team will have no choice but to change their mind about this. And so sure enough, during the course of a play-by-play, it really wasn't even, it was just kind of an odd place to do it. Bill was describing a play, and then all of a sudden he just said, by the way, I just want to say something, that this idea of me retiring and leaving it is not my idea. And his friends were absolutely right, because all of a sudden Harry Hutt, the gentleman that was working for the organization and was kind of representing the marketing and broadcasting efforts publicly, he's getting death threats from people that say, you can't possibly go through with this, you can't let Bill go. Sponsors are threatening to withdraw their commitment. Season ticket holders are saying that they're going to quit. And I'm reading all this, and I'm thinking to myself, man, whoever gets this job is going to be walking into a hornet's nest, And I really felt that what they were going to have to do was bring in a high-powered, big-name announcer so that they could say to the fans and the sponsors, we know you're disappointed that Bill isn't here anymore, but look who we got. And as confident as I try to be in myself, I couldn't imagine me being the look who we got, the guy who's never had a full-time NBA job. But in point of fact, what was happening was some of those high-powered, big-name broadcasters were being approached, and they all said, we're not really interested in this position. When you hire the next guy and he doesn't work out, then we'll replace him. But we're not going to try to go in and replace the legend. And meanwhile, at the time the Blazer job was going to be open, the Miami Heat had an opening, and they now had a guy working for them as their Harry Hutt that had hired me in Sacramento. So I really felt the Miami job was where I had the best opportunity. But I put my tape and my resume to the Blazers and to Miami, and did not really give the Blazers situation much hope. But at the time, the gentleman who does Portland State football and basketball on the radio still, Tom Hewitt, was a friend of mine, and he said, listen, Kenny Vance, who I've worked with now over the years, but Kenny at the time was a writer for the Vancouver Columbian newspaper. He said, Kenny has been promised by the Blazers that he's going to get the scoop on who gets hired to replace Bill Schonely. Maybe you two can compare notes and help each other. If you hear something, you can give it to him and vice versa. And I said, sure. And I talked to Kenny, and he said, yeah, I'll keep you posted. And then he would tell me every now and then, yeah, I'm hearing your name. It's in the mix, but there are those other big-name announcers. And so I didn't, again, give it much thought. And then it got toward the end of the season, and in fact, it was into June at that point in time. And I would call the Blazers and call Harry Hutt and never hear back from him. I figured that was a horrible sign that they weren't interested. And in Sacramento, the WNBA had started the previous year, and so I was doing the play-by-play for the WNBA team in Sacramento, the Monarchs. And we were on a 7-day road trip. It was day one, and this is back in the days when cell phones weren't as prevalent. But I was calling back home to my apartment to my answering machine to hear my messages. And all of a sudden, there's a message from Harry Hutt. First time I'd heard his voice in months. And he said, things are really heating up with the Blazer job. Need to talk with you as soon as possible. And so I thought to myself, this is great. He's probably at least wants to bring me in for an interview. At least I'll have a chance to talk to him about the job. And but then I said, but yes, it's the first day of a week-long road trip. I won't be able to get in to see him for another week. Oh, by then he will have hired somebody else. This is terrible. So my emotions are going up and down. I said, I'll just call him, see what he has to say. And so I get him on the phone. I'm in a hotel in Troy, Michigan, getting ready for a game the next day against the Detroit Shock. And Shock was a good way to describe what happened next, because I talked to Harry, and we had some small talk, and then he said, so, the Blazers play-by-play position. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, are you interested? And I said, yes, oh, very much so, yes. And he said, well, good. Well, we'd like to offer it to you. Who do we talk to, you or your agent? And I probably said the worst thing you could possibly say at that point in time. I said, you don't even want to meet me first? And he said, no, times like this, instincts take over, and there's too many people saying too many nice things, so we're ready to move forward. And I said, I guess you talked to my agent. And he said, well, you tell them that we're going to talk tomorrow and we're going to get moving on this thing, and it's all going to be great for everybody. And so I hung up the phone, and I said, I think I've just been offered the play-by-play job with the Portland Trailblazers. And I looked around the room and I said, and I have nobody to celebrate with. And so I picked up the phone and I called, I think, everybody I ever said hello to in my life to tell them about it, and using my calling card to call around the country. And so I woke up the next morning and I said, I got to call my agent in New York, tell him Harry's going to call him today, and put the call through. Wouldn't go through. Tried the calling card again, wouldn't go through. So I called up AT&T and I said, I don't know what's going on. I made plenty of calls with the card last night, and they said, hang on 1 second, and the operator came back to the line and said, there were so many calls made to so many different parts of the country, it fit the pattern of a stolen card, so we cut it off. And I said, no, I got this great job. I was just telling everybody about it. And they said, congratulations, we'll turn it back on. And but it struck me, and for all of you, that are going to be looking for the jobs that you want and so forth, it dawned on me that I had read many books, I had seen many tapes, I had heard many bits of advice about how to interview for the job of your life, and I got the job in my life, and I never even interviewed for it. So it was no rhyme or reason for how it happened, but it was crazy. But then I got here, and I found out quickly about how much of a legend Bill was, and so forth. And in fact, they had a press conference to introduce me, and I was used to being the person that would introduce subjects of a press conference. I was not used to being the subject of a press conference, and I realized it was not me so much. It was who's this guy that's going to try to come in and follow in the footsteps. And fortunately, because I was a history or student of broadcasting in the NBA, I understood that he had been around for 28 years. And so in my opening comments, I said, listen, I'm not here to replace Bill in the hearts and minds of Blazer fans. I just hope I can carve my own niche alongside his. And so before I even took any questions, I kind of addressed the subject. But the first 5 questions were all about replacing him and, what makes you think you can. And so it was interesting. And we had the first lockout that first year, so I didn't get to do a game until February, which was actually kind of frustrating. I was ready to have this great new job. But we did a lot of things with season ticket holders to try to keep them engaged with the team, even though we had no games to have them see. And it was about an 80-something-year-old season ticket holder, a woman that came up to me and said, so you're the new guy, huh? And I said, yes. And she said, well, I'm going to give you 2 games. And I said, well, I guess I better make all my mistakes and everything in the first game, because if I'm not hitting my stride by the second, I'm losing you as a listener, huh? And she said, that's right. And then we started doing the games. She came up to me later in the season again, and she said, we didn't really want to like you too much. And I said, I understand. And she said, you're okay, though. And I said, ma'am, coming from you, that's probably the nicest compliment I can get. So there were some people that grudgingly came over and said, maybe all right, we can still say we love Bill, and this guy's okay too, I guess. So but it was definitely. But I was to the point where, listen, I wasn't like those high-powered guys that could afford to turn down an offer. I mean, so I just wanted to I just wanted to be a play-by-play guy for an NBA team, and whatever circumstances that meant. But Sean's is still around. He's a great ambassador for the team. But there's still a big shadow, and for the people that grew up here, and that was the guy that they listened to, and that's the guy that they loved the Blazers for the first time hearing. I totally understand. I mean, I grew up in L.A. with legendary announcers, and those are the people you remember. You remember your first loves, and so I understand that. But now, 15 years, I've been around long enough that some of the newer fans, I'm the only person they've heard. So it's a passing of a torch and so forth. But I still got to go about 13 more years to catch Sean's for the number of years that he was on the job. But he did a great job, and certainly this job would not have been as prestigious without his involvement, and certainly how much of a legend that he was.
And you mentioned getting the job of your dreams, going into sports broadcasting. Like, what advice would you have to us college students chasing our dreams and pursuing our careers? Yeah, I mean,
I always say that most of the time for any job that's worth having and is coveted by many, as certainly, I mean, the job I have, there's only 30 people in America that have a radio position in the NBA, so it's obviously very competitive. It's obviously something that people want. And again, as I said, I came in second 4 times before I got the Blazer job, and the Blazer job in many respects was maybe the most unlikely of the ones that I pursued in terms of the the likeliness of me getting it, going into it. And so I think it just goes to show you that there's never, I shouldn't say never, there's rarely a straight line from where you start to where you end up. So you have to kind of know that there's going to be some swerves along the way. You may take a couple of steps forward or take one or two backwards. When I went to Sacramento, I actually took less money than I was making in Seattle, but I thought it was a better opportunity. And so, I kind of gauge that situation. Now, sometimes people, as they get a little older and they have a family maybe to take care of, they maybe can't make that kind of commitment because financially they couldn't take a step back. I didn't have that issue, so it was easier for me. But I had very well-meaning friends that once I got to about the third time that I was coming in second, they started thinking that maybe they were seeing something that maybe I was in denial. They said, you sure maybe you might want to think about a different path in life? Maybe somebody's trying to tell you something that, this isn't for you. But I tried to remain confident. I tried to feel that I was still making progress even though I wasn't getting over the finish line. And so I think, there's going to be times where maybe that your will is tested a little bit about how much you really want something, how much do you, are you really committed to pursuing something. So I think, it's okay to have those moments of doubt and moments of time where you may question things and others may question it for you. But I think if you stay confident, if you continue to feel like, you're making strides and if, financially you can do it, sometimes you maybe get to a point where you can't keep waiting for the great opportunity. But I always say there's little ones along the way that lead to the bigger ones. So long as you feel like you're still going forward, you're networking, you're meeting good people, you're meeting folks that can help you and at least maybe be references or sources of advice along the way. If those strides are being made and you feel confident about it, then I'd say continue on the path and don't give up a dream. That's why it's a dream. It's something that isn't usually easily attained. It's sometimes it's not as much fun if it is. So there might be some tests along the way, but stay confident and at least try to stay committed to the path you decide is right for you. And sometimes you might deviate a little bit from that path and might have to change some course, but as long as you're believing that you're moving in the right direction, even if it's not as fast as you might like it to be, then I think those are things you can kind of take some comfort in.
All right, well, let's open it up to the audience. Do any of you guys have questions for Brian? And if so, I'll just hand you the microphone.
I like that, an all-encompassing speech. I covered everything.
My question's a little more related to the team, but I was wondering who you think the Blazers are more likely to go after for this offseason, free agency-wise.
I was telling Jacob that I'm not sure it's going to be a free agent. I think that one of the nice things about having salary cap space is you could use it to go after a free agent, but you could also use it to make a trade and absorb some salary back in return. It doesn't have to be an equal deal of the teams that are at the cap can only take back whatever salary that they give out. And so with us being about $11 million under the cap, we could make a uneven trade, so to speak. And from listening to Neil O'Shea hint about things, our general manager, I seem to think that he feels there's some better options in a trade than there might be in free agency. And I think one of the things he knows is that in free agency you have a few teams competing maybe for one or two prize prospects. But in a trade, not everybody can offer the same kind of deal and can make an uneven deal. So I tend to think that he feels, and I'm very anxious to see. I mean, I know he got the job late last year, but I think he's had a full season now to evaluate things. So I really feel he's chomping at the bit to do what he can to improve the team. So I'm anxious to see what this offseason is going to be like. But I think this is his chance to put his stamp on everything. And so I anticipate we're going to be active. We're going to be talking to a lot of people, listening to a lot of people, and I think our roster will look. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe it's half different than it was at the end of this season. And a center will certainly be the primary thing we'll be looking for to add to the mix, because we gave up more points in the paint than any team in the league this year, and that had a lot to do with being undersized up front. So I know he wants to address that first and foremost. Yeah, I think J.J. Hickson, because he's young and is a power forward, since we already have a young power forward, if he was content to be a backup or in the mix of getting some time but not necessarily starters minutes, I think we would keep him, but I think he wants to go somewhere and start, and we can't offer that. Thank you. You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Brian, you have a great voice.
Thank you.
What advice would you give the broadcasters specifically about your voice and about keeping your voice in shape, and then maybe even about the knowledge that you have to bring to the table about the sports themselves?
Yeah, I think maybe I was lucky in that when I was really young, going to Catholic school, I was in the school choir, and we had a great choir director who taught us how to breathe from the diaphragm and so forth. And so I think because of some pretty good early training, I haven't had any issues with my voice itself. So I don't strain it too much. I think I'm breathing from the right places and not putting a lot of stress on the vocal cords. And I don't do a lot of really serious things. There was a great entertainer in Las Vegas who unfortunately passed away, Danny Gans, and they called him the man of 1,000 voices, and he was tremendous. One of the most creative entertainers I've ever seen in terms of imitating tremendously accurately. In fact, one of his best acts was doing both Nat and Natalie Cole singing "Unforgettable" as if it were a duet, going back and forth, from a woman's voice to deep male voice and so forth. But they told me that he would have to go into the steam room after he was done, and so there were a lot of precautions because his voice was going all over the place. A lot of precautions he had to take to make sure his voice, was taken care of. But I've been lucky in that all I do is take a cough drop after a game, just almost as a precaution, and I haven't really had any issues with it. But I think there's the nice thing about a voice is that you can train it. You can take alliteration classes. You can learn how to be. That was the other thing the choir master did, is he made us enunciate everything properly. I mean, it was Christ and Lord, and if it didn't sound right, we did it again. And so I think the best compliment I get is when people say, I can understand every word you say, and so forth. So, and I think a lot of it is that training. So I always tell people that want to do something in broadcasting to take speech classes, take voice classes, because I think those can be helpful. It helps with inflection. It helps with enunciation. It helps, and sometimes I can hear some broadcasters that when they get excited, it's really just screaming. It doesn't. They don't really have a level they can get to without it being almost hard to listen to. So that there is an art to that, certainly, and some people need different ways to take care of their voice than others. As I say, I've been lucky, but others maybe need a little more to ensure that they don't strain it and don't hurt it. But I've felt really, the other thing that I always tell everybody, whether they want to get into broadcasting or almost anything, is to take as many English classes, writing classes, because if you can learn how to communicate, that serves you well in whatever thing you decide to do for a living. And obviously it makes a lot of sense in broadcasting. So, and that's whether you're on the air or whether you're writing for somebody who is on the air, and all different aspects of the business, being able to communicate is helpful. So whether that be voice or written, it's all good training and good background to have, that's for sure. Well, the nice thing is, there's a lot of people, and it's one of the reasons I feel very fortunate. There's a lot of people that really dread getting up in the morning to go to their job, and even on the days when I remotely think I've had a tough day on the job, I usually catch myself and say, you're not digging ditches for a living, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's not as if I have any days that now if the Blazers don't win, that feels like a tough day, but in comparison to a lot of jobs, it's a great way to to earn a living. So if you told me that to do the job well, I have to watch a few more games, I think I'd probably say it's not a bad way to do homework, so to speak. And so being involved in sports, watching sports, is not something that it's probably why I do what I do, because I never really wanted to work, in the true sense of the word. And so to me, it's fun and it's play. And so, but I think there's certainly a level of that. I think when I do my talk show, I almost feel like I have to know more, because it's not just a Blazer talk show. It's other things. So I try to stay up on a lot more things, so I sound intelligent about it. I just think you can't really ever. The day that you think you can fool the audience is a dangerous day to get to. So I always try to assume that the audience is as educated, if not more so, than me, and with as many sources of discovery and investigation as there are. In many cases, that's true. So if you don't at least, as the so-called host and so-called expert, if you're not bringing to the game or bringing to the show some level of knowledge, then you're probably not only cheating the audience but cheating yourself. So yes, so I feel there's some level of that. And preparation to me is a huge thing for whatever you're doing, be it a game, a broadcast, a class. It's one of those things where I try to over prepare. I always have a vision. It's never happened, and it probably never will. But I always have a vision that some guy's going to have a ferocious dunk and tear down the rim, and we're going to have a half-hour delay while they bring, they clean the glass and bring a new backboard out. Do I have enough information? Do I have enough stories that could somehow keep people interested in still listening to the broadcast if we don't have an actual game to describe? And so it's never happened. If it ever does, I'll say, now there's the day I was preparing for all these years. But I try to visualize that, do I have enough there in case I need it, and that it's okay to finish a game and have more than I needed. But if something came up and it was unexpected, if I've somehow prepared for it, then you feel good about putting in that extra effort and that extra time, to sound knowledgeable and actually, in fact, be knowledgeable. I've always been pretty open about things. I just feel, and I think some people get to some, quasi-celebrity status, and they become more guarded about, themselves, and maybe, perhaps I know when I was in Seattle and I was doing a talk show, I used to have a home phone number that was listed, and it took another one of the hosts to say, do you know how dangerous that is if you were to say something to a caller and you didn't really mean to offend them, and somehow they were offended, that they could actually find you, and I actually had to be told to be maybe not as naive as I was about just trusting everybody, which I kind of do. And so I just in general have just felt that, if I'm going through something, be it attempt to lose weight or trying to deal with sleep apnea or whatever, these are things that I figure that some people are going through it, and so maybe if I talk about it, then perhaps maybe it makes it easier for somebody to say, well, if he's dealing with it and he found something that works for him, maybe I can do the same. And so since I had been so open about everything, I mean, I knew I was adopted at birth, and I knew I was born to a teenage girl whose mother wouldn't let her keep me when I was born, and so the parents I grew up with were great. They passed away too soon. My dad died when I was a freshman in high school, my mom when I was a sophomore in college. And so I went a lot of years without parents, but I don't know if it was turning 50 last year, but for whatever reason I sent away for my natural birth certificate, and I thought maybe I should have done it sooner, but I found out, as it turns out, that Illinois, where I was born, had only become an open adoption state, not this Christmas, but 2 Christmases ago. So it was about this time, May of last year, that I sent my $15 in for a copy of my birth certificate, and I called to check on how long it might be, and they told me the scenario of how they just become an open adoption state a few months ago. And the woman said, as you can imagine, there was a mad dash from a lot of people that have been waiting for this, so we're still working on the Christmas request, so it'll be a while, be patient. And I actually had kind of forgotten about it, and then in August of last year, I was looking at my checking account online, and I saw a $15 check was cash, and I had to click it on to see what it was, and I said, oh, that was for the birth certificate. So they had told me, they said, you may not even have a name if the mother or father requested their name not be on there, but at least you'll see it. So it arrived in the mail, and there's just one 8.5 by 11 sheet that was folded up, and I opened it, and I don't know if it was because it was in bold type, but the first thing I saw was name withheld by request, and I said, that's not there, but it was the father's name, but there was a mother's name, Barbara Schneider, and had an address that she was in Chicago and she was 17, which fit the story that I'd been told. And I said, that's interesting, Barbara Schneider. And it actually said that my name was James when I first was born. And so it was interesting information. And then I thought, well, now what do I do with it? Because I think that might have been one of the reasons I had always hesitated, because I said, even if I get a name, what happens then? What do I do? And I was actually doing an interview on a talk show that day. And I said, you know what, I've shared so many things with people, I'm going to throw this out there. And so at the end of the interview, I said, listen, I said, I just found my birth certificate with my natural mother's name on it. I said, I know there's a lot of adoption search agencies out there. If anybody's had any experience, good or bad, with one, I could use some assistance. And I said, here's my Twitter address. And 10 people sent advice, and one of them said, try the adoptionspecialist.com. And so I said, it sounds like somebody who actually, this is a serious vocation if they call themselves the adoption specialist. And it was a woman in Long Beach, California, and that's all she does is unite birth families. And her name was Lisa Townsend. And I started thinking, I said, now, on the show Charlie's Angels, Charlie Townsend was the investigator, and he was a pretty good investigator. And I said, and the Who, I love the Who as a rock group, and Pete Townsend's a pretty good guitarist. And we used to have a shooting coach with the Blazers, John Townsend, and he was a nice guy. I said, so I said, this Townsend thing, that must be a good sign. And so I said, all right, I'll call her up. And she said, well, I guarantee you I will find your birth mother, living or dead. I'll find her. And if she is passed away, then if she has relatives connected with her, I'll find them too. And I said, okay. So wasn't that cheap, but I invested in it. And right away, about a week, she said, it's one of 8 Barbara Schneiders. And I thought, I'm thinking the world. And so I said 8, that's pretty good. And she said, yeah, but if she had put her middle name or middle initial on it, it would be easier to find her, but it's probably still going to take a month. And I said, okay, that's fine, I'll wait. And so it was kind of interesting. I mean, I love mysteries. I wasn't used to being the subject of one, but a month later she said, I'm 95% sure I found her, and I'm 90% sure she's alive. And so then a week later she sent the full report, and Barbara Schneider was now Barbara Olberts, and she's living in Rockford, Illinois, with her husband, Hugh. And shortly after she had me, she had 2 daughters, and I noticed that they had Olbert as their last name, and I thought, I wonder about this, but I didn't say something out loud. But I had a phone number, and I was coached as to what to say, and so I called the first time. I got an answering machine at their house, and I thought it probably wouldn't be wise to just leave a message and say, it's your long-lost son, give me a call. And so I said, I'll have to call back. But I thought, gosh, I mean, sometimes these days people don't pick up the phone if they don't recognize the number. What if I keep calling and they don't pick it up? But I said, so the second time I called 3 hours later, a man answered. I assumed it was Hugh, but I just said, is Barbara there? And he said, yes. And may I ask who's calling? And the adoption specialist had told me to say that my mother and her were old friends, and just say that. So fortunately, he said, hang on a second, because if he had started asking me more questions, I would have had to say, I don't know what else I'm supposed to say with you. To you. I was just coached on that. But he fortunately turned it over to her, and she said, hello, and I said, Barbara, and she said, yes. I said, I'm Brian Wheeler, and I didn't know if my name would mean anything to her, but she didn't say anything, and she said, yes, and I said, I just received a copy of my natural birth certificate, and I have every reason to believe that your name is on there and that you're my birth mother. And she said, what? And then I repeated it, and she said, where were you born? And I said, Chicago, Illinois. When were you born? January 18, 1962. Where'd you grow up? And I said, Chicago. I said, well, I grew up in Los Angeles. We moved there when I was 2 months old. And she said, she said, that's what I was waiting to hear. And she paused and said, well, I guess I am your mother. And she just laughed, and I explained the whole story of how I found her. And after about 10 minutes, I said, now, on the birth certificate, it says that my father's name was legally withheld by request. Do you have any idea of his whereabouts or what happened to him? And I just thought maybe 17 years old, it was just a fling and somebody that she hadn't stayed connected with. And she laughed and said, well, as a matter of fact, come February, I'm going to be celebrating my 50th wedding anniversary with him. He's my husband. And I said, I thought that might be possible. And she said, why? And I said, because I noticed that your daughters were born shortly after me and that they had his last name, and I started thinking maybe he's my dad too. And then she said, yep, he is. And so he got on the phone and he said, hello, son. And so that was interesting. And so they had kept this a secret for 50 years. The only people that knew about it were her mother, who had passed away, and a friend of his. But that's the only, and I said, man, I got to hand it to you people. I have trouble keeping a secret what the weather's going to be tomorrow. I said, for 50 years, you guys have kept a pretty good one. And she said, yeah, we have. And one of they had a family that it was a family that kind of had been through some difficulties. Their oldest daughter had actually passed away in her sleep on New Year's Eve a few years ago. She was only 42. They think she had an aneurysm. The daughter that was alive, she's married with 3 kids. The oldest, all boys. The oldest, they had a gun in the house, and he was playing with it one day, and they weren't in the room at the time, but they don't think it was intentional. But he shot himself through his neck, and bullet ended up, in his brain and killed him. And so they've had some challenges, and so I called him on a Monday. On a Wednesday, the sister that was alive or is alive was having a birthday, and when they got off the phone, they thought they still were going to keep it a secret and that they weren't going to say anything. But then they thought about it a little more, at least Barbara did, and she said to Hugh, we're too old to worry about what people think about us. Hugh felt that somehow maybe it was an indictment of his ability as a caretaker of a family, that he couldn't, take care of me when I was first born. But, Barbara's mother said, you're still in school, you got to finish school. And so, but he was kind of still reticent about it. So as most smart women do, Barbara figured out a way to have something happen, but make Hugh think it was really his idea, because guys like to think that. So they were having a birthday party for what's interesting is before I ever arrived, they had the B thing going. It was Barbara, Bridget, Bonnie as the daughter's name. So Bridget, the one still alive, was just having a birthday party on Friday. So Barbara tells Bridget about it before the party, and Bridget's thrilled. And so she says, now listen, your father's still not sure about this whole thing. What we're going to do is on Friday, I'm going to get him to the party, pump a couple of drinks in him and relax him, and then I'm going to say, come on, let's just tell her. And then hopefully he'll say yes. So if I start talking to you again, like I'm doing it now, act like you're hearing it all for the first time. And so sure enough, got him to the party, a couple of drinks in him, says, come on, let's tell her. And all right, so they go and tell her, and a few hours later he says, that was a good idea I had, that, tell Bridget about it. And so naturally he thought it was his idea. But it ended up being a thing that they've warmly embraced it, fortunately. And in fact, the day after the party, Scott, the widower of Bonnie, who was at the party and stayed close to the family, he called up Barbara and said, Barbara, his family's been through some tough things. This is a really nice thing for us to find out about, and, we really need this. And I told Barbara, I said, I don't know if I can live up to that. I said, you might meet me and say, this is all there is. I mean, we need more than this. And but fortunately, I met him, and I've seen him a few times, and they're very, very nice people. So I think for me, I would have been okay if I had gone through the rest of my life and never found this out. But I think for them, it's been a little, validation. And she said, we tried to look for you, but they didn't know a name or anything. And so it was a shot in the dark to even try. But I think to find out, that the kid they gave up isn't living out of a box somewhere or something, at least it gives them some feeling that they did the right thing, when they made the move. So it's certainly a sign that, you're never too old to have something, pretty adventurous happen in your life. So it's been quite a discovery over the last year, and it's a big family. The father comes from a family of 9, and the mother's mother was married twice, so she's got some people on that side of the family. So they have a family reunion every year in Wisconsin, and this next one's in July that I'll be going to, and I'll probably need a couple of them to meet everybody. But it's nice. It's very nice, and I think it's kind of good to find some nice people in your life that you didn't even know were in your life. So it's been a good story.
Well, touching back on basketball, you've been with the Blazers the last 15 years. I'm just kind of interested, what's your favorite, most memorable moment? And also maybe your most embarrassing as well.
Most embarrassing, okay. Well, I know what the worst moment was. The worst moment was certainly Game 7 of the 2000 finals with the Lakers, when we were up 13 going to the fourth quarter, and then somehow lost the game, and we would have gone on to win a championship, I think, like they did that year, and maybe more. But and I remember the game just slipping away and thinking to myself, should I go out on the court and get arrested or something, just to break the momentum here? And and I thought probably wisely that wasn't a good thing to do. But it was so frustrating to have a helpless feeling that you couldn't do anything about what was happening as the game was slipping away. And the best story I have about that is our team chaplain, who's a great guy. The next day, I was still having trouble dealing with how bad a loss that was and how devastating it was. And so I said, I'll call up Al. He always makes me feel better. And so I talking to him, and I said, Al, the frustrating thing is I don't know why God would allow Phil Jackson to continue to be successful. I said, Phil Jackson is a guy that, he cheated on his wife to go out with the daughter of the Lakers owner, and it looks like they're gonna shack up now, and basically he's not a nice guy to other people. And I think at any second he's going to stop me and say, now listen, God has more important things to worry about than who wins a basketball game, But I go through the whole story about my frustration and everything about Phil, and then I'm waiting to get lectured, and I pause, and he says, you know what? I've been asking myself the same thing. And so I knew he was a good team chaplain, because he felt the same level of frustration that we were feeling at that point in time. But, one of the great moments was probably actually the game before that, Game 6, when we forced it to go back to a seventh game. The crazy thing for me is the first 2 years I was here, we made the conference finals the first 2 seasons and came within that bad fourth quarter, maybe winning a championship. And you start to think, well, this is going to happen all the time. And then we haven't won a playoff series since. I mean, so it's 13 years without winning a playoff series, and a few of those years now have been like this one, not even getting to the playoffs. So you learn to appreciate good moments when you have them, that's for sure. And I wish that I was a better I asked the Clippers announcer one time, Ralph Lawler, and they have a good team now, but they had a lot of years of a really bad team. So I said, how do you get through the games? I mean, you've had bad seasons. Sometimes the games aren't even competitive. And he said, I tell myself that I have the greatest job in the world, and every night I'm seeing the best athletes, and I might see something on a given night I might never see again. And I said, it's a great attitude. And I remember when he said it, but then I said, gosh, I hope I never have to apply it, though. But there have been some seasons where I've had to do the same. And I'm not the best loser in the world, and so anybody who listens to the games knows that I feel the frustration when things aren't going well. And that's my greatest challenge, has always been that understanding that people are tuning into the broadcast, and I still have to give them a reason to continue to listen. And there's some nights where that's easier said than done. But and I think we had a game this year where we lost by 29. I mean, fortunately, we didn't have a lot of bad games this year, even though we finished well under 500, but it was a bad game right before the All-Star break. And I think I said, just to be honest about it, in the fourth quarter of that game, I said, if you've been listening from the start of the broadcast and you're still listening now, then you are a true Blazer fan, that you've sat through this, because there's been a few times where I felt like stopping to talk because it's been that frustrating. But but I think, again, it's just part of trying to be honest and trying to be genuine and try to say, I understand your frustration because I'm frustrated too. But embarrassing moment. I think it might have been, we have a great studio engineer who's very good at, when we go to commercials, he pots us down right away. And there have been a few moments where if we're not playing well and we get to a commercial and, back after this on the Blazers radio network, and then, what the F are we doing? I don't understand. And you're taught, hopefully you guys are all taught, that anytime you're in front of a microphone, it's a live microphone potentially. And so I've learned now that I wait until I hear the commercial start to know that we aren't on the air. But there was a day when we had, I think, 2 quick timeouts right after the other, and Rich Patterson, our studio engineer, was on the other side of the studio when I went to the second timeout, thinking that there wouldn't be another one for a little bit, and he's running back to the control board to hit the commercial, and something was not going right for us, and I didn't wait, and I think I said the out cue, and normally I just trust he starts the commercial. And I think I said, that effing whatever, and it got over the air. So it was not my finest moment. But I sensed it because I didn't hear the commercial. So that's, now I wait, and I tell Antonio Harvey, my partner, because sometimes, rare occasions, he gets frustrated. But a couple times he started. I said, wait till you hear the commercial just to be sure. But his best attribute is when I get frustrated, which is more often than him. He used to try to pacify me and try to say, well, maybe they're, doing it. And then the more he would try to come up with a reason, well, then they shouldn't, and then I'd get mad at him. And so now he just kind of stays silent. And I know that's kind of like my cue that, all right, just say what you got to say, get it out, and, come back to earth, and then, be calm again and compose. So it's kind of a routine we figured out over 8 years of working with one another. But fortunately, not too many embarrassing moments, and hopefully we haven't hit our high for the best moment yet. Sean's was lucky enough to have a championship, and the broadcasters. I always say, people, that what I was lucky about when I first got here in the midst of trying to replace Sean's is we had a very good team, and so that helped, because the broadcaster always sounds better when the team's doing well. There's no question about that. So, because I know if we had started out 0-7, and I'm describing disappointing plays, people would have said, this stuff never happened when Sean's was around. And so, but fortunately, we're winning games, and hey, this guy's not bad, because I'm describing good plays. So just like a coach will say he's only good as good as his players, sometimes the broadcaster only as good as how well the team plays. So if I'm not sounding good on a given night, I blame it on the players. So that's my out.
Well, do you guys have any more questions for him? I have one more. Who's your favorite Blazer of all time?
Ooh, that's a good one. Favorite Blazer of all time. I knew Scottie Pippen before when I was in Chicago working for the Bulls Network for a couple of years, not doing play-by-play, but pre-F and post-game work. And so I enjoyed having him here a lot because of the way he conducted himself and because he was still a very good player when he was here. But for somebody who was here for a while, I always liked Damon. He was good, and he talked basketball with you. He talked sports with you. The frustration sometimes among people that have followed basketball for a while, like some of us that are older, is when you get some of the younger players and they don't necessarily know who Bill Russell was, or they don't know some of the the Hall of Famers that came before them. It isn't as important for them to know the history of the game that they're playing. So Damon was he was a guy that really knew a lot of basketball history, and he could talk about that. So he was great. Brandon was certainly great. And it's a shame that we didn't have him longer than we have. And but I've been lucky. I mean, we probably have only had, it's possible that I might write a book that would be similar to a book I've seen a few other broadcasters write, that's kind of tales from the fill in the blank with the team, and we would certainly have a chapter on the Trailblazers and some of those guys, and we had J.R. Ryder was probably the most unique, and I only had him for 1 year, but before I got here, he was probably as convincing a conniver as anybody that was around, and I guess there was a story that Mike Rice told me when he was doing the games with Sean's that J.R. Ryder came on the team bus one day and he had brand new shoes on, and Sean's complimented him on the shoes, and he said, "You like these?" He said, "I can get you a pair." He said, "What size you wear?" And he said 12 or whatever. He goes, "I'll have them in a week." And walked to the back of the bus, and Rice told Sean, he said, "You're never going to get those shoes." And he said, "No, you heard him. He's going to get them for me." And so Sean's waited a week, waited 2 weeks, and nothing happened. So he said to JR, he said, "JR, you want to get me those shoes?" He said, "You know what?" He said, "What size you want?" And he said 12. He said, "Nice stupid agent. He got me 11." He goes, "I sent him back." He goes, "But yours are coming." And so he waited another week, 2 weeks. Sean says, "JR, those shoes." "You know what?" He said, "You wanted the color like I have, right?" And he said, "Now they have another color." He goes, "They said the wrong color." He goes, "Yours are coming." And so, waited another week, another 2 weeks. Sean said to me, he said, "JR, those shoes." "You know what?" He said, "They sent two right shoes." They sent, and Rice observed that every time. Finally, Sean gave up. He never got the shoes, but he observed it, and every time, at a split-second notice, Ryder had a different excuse than the one he had before, and always started with, "You know what?" But it was not the same excuse. It sounded somewhat plausible, but when you pieced it all together, you were like, "This is never going to change." And he probably got asked to make more times. He would have had a different. But that was Jr. He was definitely, probably. So he would be in the book. I mean, I didn't have too many stories. I mean, my 1 year with him, he was, he was probably on his better behavior than most, But so we had a few guys like that fortunately we don't have anymore. Thankfully, we have some guys I think we're a little more proud of to not only watch play but also deal with off the court. But there were a few in the day that probably you wouldn't want your sister to date. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and you see that with like Rasheed Wallace and Zach Randolph. Like they kind of goofed off a lot in Portland, and then they go to other cities like Rasheed going to Detroit or Zach going to Memphis, and they succeeded there. I mean.
I like both those guys, and I think Zach's problem, was that he was a follower, and so he had Darius Miles here, and I think Darius was not a good influence for him. And Zach, you'd often hear stories about, and he had a lot of guys in his group that weren't the best. They'd say a friend of Zach Randolph's was at a club, and Zach was there, but he wasn't involved necessarily in the incident, but he'd be on the periphery of things that would go wrong. Wouldn't necessarily be the person going wrong. Zach Randolph did ask me, though, the most unique question that I ever had asked by a player. We were traveling to Seattle. We're getting our bags in the hotel, going up to a room, and he said, "Wheels." He said, "I got to ask you an important question." And he was really nervous and everything. And I said, "Well, what's up, Z?" And he said, he pulled me over the side so he could talk quiet. He said, "Do you have any Cialis?" And I said, No. And I said, "Why?" And he goes, "I got a couple of girls coming tonight. I need some Cialis, And it was right around the time I think Barkley had started telling people that athletes, not necessarily because they needed it, but just because they wanted to be sure, would take these, these supplements to make sure that there wouldn't be any issues. And I said, "Well, Z, you're fine. You won't have any problems." He goes, No, I got to find some help. And he walked away, and I thought to myself, now I can take this one of two ways. I said, now either he thinks that I'm kind of hip and I'm kind of a playa, and maybe I'm doing the same thing that he's doing, or he thinks I'm old and I actually need it, So And I didn't. I said I'm going to prefer to think it's the former. But and the next day I saw him and I said, get it? He goes, oh yeah, I got it. Yeah, I was fine. And then he went out at the start of the game and he was horrible, just horrible. So I knew he got no sleep. And it was one of those situations where I had knowledge of something, but I couldn't really say it. And I think I know why he's he's struggling at the start of the game tonight. But it was the most unique request that I'd ever had from a player was that Cialis. So there you go.
Well, is there any more questions? Last second questions for him? Well, we just want to thank you, Brian, for coming on.
My pleasure.
So thank you so much.